This is I Am the Scum by special request, doing a response to Will's video. Will, you're doing a response to CJ talking about why atheists try to convert people to their line of thinking, or why people should reject the claims of religion. You responded to that in name only. You didn't actually respond to any of the content of the video. Instead, you decided to go off into some really, really bad apologetics, trying to prove God via objective morality. There is a lot wrong with this video. I'm going to go through it really quickly. The first half of the video, I don't have too much of a problem with. You're talking about what atheism is and isn't. I've done the semantics argument way too many times, and I'm not going to do it again. So I'm fine with that. Let's just move on. You made a couple of claims in this video that I have problems with, and I'm quoting these. Sometimes I'm paraphrasing for the sake of clarity. One, you say, if there is to be any justice, that requires objective moral value. This is where it starts to go wrong. At no point have you ever bothered to demonstrate that there must be objective value before we can say that something is just and unjust. I'm not even sure if there's any coherency between objective value. Values, as far as I'm aware, are subjective things. I can value something and you not value it. It's a part of your perspective. That's subjective. So what is an objective value? You never actually go into that, so I can't really say too much about it. That's a recurring theme in this video. I'm not really going to bother to address it every time it crops up. Then you go into this next claim that's, I'll just repeat it. You say, if good and evil don't exist, then what that implies is that there is also no objective truth. What? You don't bother to explain that relationship whatsoever. Why must there? I mean, first of all, you're defining like good and evil and morality as like the statements of ought, which I'm fine with. I think that's a very good definition. But if there's no existing ought statement or ought ideology, whatever you would call an existing ought, then there's no objective truth. What? You don't show why that leads to the other. That doesn't even make sense to me. I would agree that objective truth is a necessary factor for objective oughts, for pretty much anything really. But you're like turning it the other way around, and it doesn't make any sense. Number 3. I'm quibbling a little bit over this one, but this is actually important because you can end up embarrassing yourself on this one. You say, if objective moral values exist, evil exists. Not true. You actually explicitly defined evil as a deviation from the way things ought to be. But just because things ought to be a certain way does not mean that there is something that deviates from that. For example, if God were to decree everything ought to be precisely the way it is right now, then by your standard, there would be no evil. So it doesn't necessarily follow that because there is an ought, that there's an evil or a deviation. Furthermore, the part where you're going to end up embarrassing yourself is that if God created morality, if he created these oughts, then it necessarily follows that he created evil. And I don't think you want to go there. I'm not going to bother bringing up the book of Malachi, because I've done that one too many times also. And next one you say, and there can't be a way things ought to be unless there is a design plan of some sort. No, that's not true. Why is design a requirement for statements of ought? You, again, don't bother addressing this point. You don't back it up at all. In fact, I could, if what you say is correct, then are you saying that the only way you can make ought statements about anything is if you are the designer of it? Or if you... I don't know. I don't get that. Because what if I design a weapon for killing people, and then I proceed to use it in precisely that manner, could you tell me that I ought not do that? But I'm doing it precisely the way I designed it to be. So, anyways, and then you have this syllogistic argument at the end, right here. This is really bad. I'm so sick of apologists trying to prove God via objective morality. This fails miserably every time. I'm going through this quickly. You say good and evil exist. At no point in this entire video have you bothered to show that good and evil are existing things. Now, I agree that there are things that exist to which I ascribe the qualities of good or evil. But that's my value judgment. That doesn't mean good and evil things exist. There are things that I identify a certain way. There are things upon which I have a certain perspective. Again, subjective. And then you say, and I really can't believe you did this. You said, because objective moral values exist, assuming you've proven that, for the sake of argument, because objective moral values exist, there must be a transcendent being from which moral values derive and thereby remain to us as objective. Now, as ZJ pointed out already, you're basically walking into Euthyphro's dilemma. I'm going to briefly elaborate on that, and that is, it's about the relationship between good and evil and God, and it goes, is something good because God does it, or does God do something because it's good? Now, the second one that I just said is, does God do something because it's good? That means that good and evil exist beyond God, and thus God's not necessary, which would totally invalidate your argument because you're trying to prove God. So you're definitely not going that way. But as ZJ pointed out, if moral values are up to God, then how can we really say that they're objective? If they're in his mind, that is, then we can't say that they're objective. But now I'm going to take this opportunity to respond to one of the common apologist responses to Euthyphro's dilemma. I don't know if this is actually the route you're going. If it's not, I'm not strawmanning you. I'm just getting rid of this argument. And that is that morals, or goodness, are a reflection of God's nature, and therefore it is an objective truth that God's nature is a certain way, and thus we ought to act in a manner that coincides with it. Okay. This is bad because you are trying, with this argument, to prove that God exists. Don't tell me about his nature when you haven't even shown me that he's real. You could just as easily be talking about the nature of a fictitious character. The nature of a fictitious character wouldn't translate into objective moral truths of our universe. So you have to beg the question in order to even go that route. You're saying God exists because objective moral values exist, and objective moral values exist because God exists. Whereas that may be true, it doesn't prove anything. It's inherently circular. And that's like the big problem. The other one is that if it really is true that God does exist and he does have a nature, why should I value it? This is the big problem. If that's up to me, if that's it's necessarily a question of value, and if I don't, then it's subjective yet again, and thus if I value it, or if you value it and I don't, then it's not really objective at all, is it? You're just saying that it is objectively the case that God has a certain nature, but that doesn't translate into morality. A tree has a nature. That doesn't translate into morality. So, yeah.